Most people consider life a battle, but it isn't a battle. It's a game. It is a game, however, that cannot be played successfully without knowledge of spiritual law, and the Old and New Testaments provide the rules for it with wonderful clarity. Jesus Christ taught that it was a great game of give and take. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. This means that everything a man contributes, in word or deed, will come back to him. What he gives, he will receive back. If he gives hatred, he will receive hatred. If he gives love, he will receive love. If he gives criticism, he will receive criticism. If he lies, he will be lied to. If he deceives, he will be deceived. We have also been taught that the faculty of imagination plays a central role in the game of life. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 4:23. This means that, sooner or later, a person acts out what he imagines. I know of a man who feared a certain disease. It was a very rare and difficult illness to contract, but he imagined it constantly and read about it all the time, until it manifested in his body, and he died, a victim of his distorted imagination. It is clear to us then that, to successfully play the game of life, we must train the faculty of imagination. A person whose faculty has been trained to imagine only the good brings into his or her life all the just desires of his or her heart: health, wealth, love, friends, perfect self-expression, his or her highest ideals. The imagination has been called the scissors of the mind, for it is always slicing and dicing, day after day, the images man sees there, and sooner or later it externalizes its own creations to the outside world. To train the imagination successfully, man must understand how his mind works. The Greeks said, "Know thyself." The mind is subdivided into three departments: the subconscious, the conscious, and the superconscious. The subconscious is simply power without direction. It is like steam or electricity that obeys and does what it is told to do. It has no power of induction. Everything that a person feels deeply or imagines clearly is imprinted on the subconscious mind and is fulfilled down to the smallest detail. For example, I know a woman who, as a child, pretended to be a widow. She dressed in black clothes and wore a long black veil, and people thought she was very curious and funny. She grew up and married a man she was deeply in love with. But soon after, he died, and she returned to that childhood fantasy of being a widow, wearing black and a wide veil for many years. The image of herself as a widow was imprinted on her subconscious mind, and in due time, it resolved itself, despite the pain and devastation that this entailed. The conscious mind has been called the mortal or carnal mind. This is the human mind that sees life as it appears to be. It sees death, disaster, disease, poverty, and limitations of all kinds, and it impresses the subconscious. The superconscious mind is the mind of God within every human being, and it is the realm of perfect ideas. Within it lies the perfect pattern of which Plato speaks, the divine design. For there is a divine design for each person. There is a place we must fill that no one else can fill, and something we must do that no one else can do. There is a perfect image of this in the superconscious mind, and it often passes through the conscious mind as an unattainable ideal, something too good to be true. It is, in fact, humankind's true destiny, shown to them by the infinite intelligence within them. However, many people are unaware of their true destiny and strive for things and situations that are not theirs, and that, if achieved, would only bring them failure and dissatisfaction. For example, a woman came to me and asked me to prophesy that she would marry a certain man with whom she was deeply in love. She referred to him as AB. I replied that this would be a violation of spiritual law, but that I would prophesy so that the right man would appear, the divine selection, the man who belonged to her by divine right. If AB is the right man, you won't lose him. And if he isn't, you'll get his equivalent, I added. She saw AB frequently, but it didn't go beyond the friendship she professed for him. One night, she called me. "You know, AB hasn't seemed so wonderful to me for a week now," he confessed. "Maybe he's not the right choice. Maybe another man is the right one," I told her. Shortly after, she met another man who fell in love with her instantly and who said she was his ideal. In fact, he told her everything she had always wanted AB to tell her. "It was quite strange," he said later. She reciprocated his love and lost all interest in AB. This demonstrates the law of substitution. A correct idea is replaced by an incorrect one, so there was no loss or sacrifice. Jesus Christ said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." And he said that this kingdom was within man himself, the kingdom of correct ideas, or the pattern. Divine. Jesus Christ taught that a person's words play a central role in the game of life. By your words you are justified, and by your words you are condemned. Many people have brought tragedy into their lives by using useless words. A woman once asked me why her life was mired in poverty and full of limitations. She used to have a house, was surrounded by beautiful things, and had plenty of money. Together, we discovered that she had often grown tired of housework and had repeatedly said and thought, "I'm sick of all this stuff. I wish I lived in a trunk." "I'm living in that trunk today," he confessed to me. She had put herself in a trunk. The subconscious mind has no sense of humor, and people often joke about their unhappy experiences. Another example was given to me by this woman who had a lot of money, but she constantly joked that she was preparing for her times of poverty. Within a few years, she found herself almost destitute, having managed to impress her subconscious mind with the images of lack and limitation she fed it. Fortunately, the law works both ways, and a situation of lack can be changed to one of abundance. A certain woman came to me one hot summer day, seeking a prosperity blessing. She was exhausted, dejected, and discouraged. She said all she had in the world was $8. "Well, we will bless the $8 and multiply them as Jesus Christ multiplied the loaves and fishes," I told him. For he taught that every man had the power to bless and multiply, to heal and prosper. "What should I do now?" was his next question. Follow your intuition. Do you have a gut feeling? Do you feel like doing something specific or going somewhere in particular? Intuition means to see within or to be taught from within. It is man's infallible guide, and I will discuss its laws more fully in a later chapter. "I don't know," he replied. "I seem to have a hunch that I'm going home. I have just enough money to make the trip by car." His home was in a distant city, and there were deprivations and limitations there. The reasoning mind, or intellect, would have suggested he stay in New York, get a job, and earn some money. "Then go home," I suggested. Never dismiss a hunch. The infinite spirit opens the path to great abundance. It's like an irresistible magnet for everything that belongs to it by divine right. I advised her to repeat that thought frequently, and she went home more calmly. One day, when she called an acquaintance, she reconnected with an old family friend and, through this friendship, received thousands of dollars in the most miraculous way. Tell people about the woman who came to you with $8 and a hunch. She repeats to me now when I see her. There is always abundance on the path of man, but it can only manifest itself through desire, faith, or the spoken word. Jesus Christ made it clear that man must take the first step. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. Matthew 7:7. In Scripture we read, "Command me concerning the works of my hands." The infinite intelligence God is always ready to fulfill the smallest or greatest human requests. Every desire, expressed or unspoken, is a demand. We are often startled to see a desire suddenly fulfilled. For example, I remember one particular Passover when I saw many beautiful rose bushes in the florist windows and longed to receive one. And for a moment, I saw in my mind's eye how it was delivered to my door. Passover came, and with it, a beautiful rose bush. The next day, I thanked my friend and told her it was just what I wanted. However, she confessed to me that she had not sent roses, but lilies. The manager had confused the order and sent me a rose bush simply because I had set the law in motion, and I was to have my rose bush. The only thing that stands between man and his highest ideals and all his heart's desires is doubt and fear. When man can desire without worry, every desire will be instantly fulfilled. In a later chapter, I will explain in more detail the scientific reason for this and how fear must be erased of consciousness. These are the only enemies of man: the fear of lack, the fear of failure, the fear of illness, the fear of loss, and the feeling of insecurity on some level. Jesus Christ said, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" We can see that we must replace fear with faith, because fear is only faith inverted. It is faith in evil instead of good. The goal of the game of life is to clearly see one's own good and erase all mental images of evil. This must be done by impressing the subconscious mind with the realization of good. A very brilliant man, who has achieved great success, told me that he had suddenly erased all fear from his consciousness by reading a sign hanging in a room. He saw, printed in large letters, this statement: "Why worry? It will probably never happen." These words were indelibly engraved in his subconscious, and now he has the firm conviction that only good can come into his life. Therefore, only good can manifest. In the next chapter, we'll discuss the different methods of imprinting the subconscious mind. It is a faithful servant of man, but we must be careful to give it the right orders. Man always has a silent listener at his side, his subconscious mind. Every thought, every word is imprinted on it and reproduced in astonishing detail. It's like a singer recording on the sensitive disc of a phonograph record. Every note and tone of the singer's voice is recorded. If they cough or hesitate, it is also recorded. So let's break all the old, bad records in the subconscious mind, the records of lives we don't wish to keep, and make new, beautiful ones. Say these words out loud with power and conviction. I now crush and demolish, with my word, every false record in my subconscious mind. They will return to the dust heap of nothingness from which they came, for they came from my own vain imaginings. I now make my records perfect through the Christ within, the records of health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression. This is the archetype of life, the complete game. In the following chapters, I will show how man can change his conditions by changing his words. Any man who does not know the power of the word is outdated. He has fallen behind in time. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. Law of prosperity. Yes, the Almighty will be your defense, and you will have abundant silver. One of the greatest messages given to humanity throughout the Scriptures is that God speaks about providing for man, and that man can release, through his spoken word, all that is his by divine right. However, he must have absolute and total faith in his spoken word. Isaiah said, "My word will not return to me void, but will accomplish the purpose for which it was sent." Now we know that words and thoughts are a tremendous vibratory force that always shapes a person's body and affairs. Some time ago, a woman visited me in great distress and said she was going to be sued on the 15th of the following month for $3,000. She didn't know how to get the money, and she was desperate. I told her that God was her supply, and there is a supply for every demand. So I preached and gave thanks that the woman would receive $3,000 at the right time and in the right way. I told her that she must have perfect and absolute faith and act on her perfect faith. The 15th arrived, but the money hadn't materialized. She called me on the phone and asked what she should do, and I told her it was Saturday, and she wouldn't receive the demand that day. I suggested she act richly, thus showing perfect faith that she would receive it on Monday. She asked me to have lunch together to build up her courage, and when I joined her at the restaurant, I told her this was no time to economize, to order an expensive lunch and act as if she had already received the $3,000. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believing, you will receive, I told him, and I reinforced that he should act as if he had already received it. The next morning she called me and asked me to stay with her for the day, but I encouraged her by reminding her that she was divinely protected and that God never arrives too late. At night she called again, very excited, and said, "My dear, a miracle has happened. I was sitting in my room this morning when the doorbell rang. I told the maid not to let anyone in, but she looked out the window and told me it was my cousin, the one with the long white beard. I asked her to call him, and even though he was almost around the corner when he heard the maid's voice, he came back. We talked for an hour, and just as he was leaving, he asked me how my finances were. I told him I needed the money, and he said he would give me $3,000 on the first of the month. I didn't want to tell him I was going to be sued. What am I going to do now? I won't receive it until the beginning of the month, and I should have it tomorrow. I'll stay on the case, I told him. The Spirit never arrives too late. I'm thankful for the money I've received on the invisible plane, and I'm thankful it will manifest in time. Her cousin called her the next morning and told her to come to his office because he had the money ready for her. That afternoon, she had the $3,000 in the bank, and she set about writing checks as quickly as her excitement would allow. If you ask for success and prepare for failure, you will get the situation you have prepared for. For example, a man came to me asking me to prophesy that a certain debt would be canceled. I noticed that he spent his time planning what he would say to the man when he didn't pay his bill, thus neutralizing my words, when in reality, he should have seen himself paying off the debt. We have a wonderful illustration of this in the Bible, related to the 3 kings who were in the desert without water for their men and horses. They consulted the prophet Elisha, who gave them this surprising message. Thus says the Lord, you will not see wind, nor will you see rain, but make this valley full of ditches. A man must prepare for what he has asked for, even when there is not the slightest sign of it. For example, I know of this woman who found herself having to look for an apartment during the year when there was a severe shortage of them in New York. It was considered almost impossible. What a shame! You'll have to store your furniture and live in a hotel, his friends lamented. You don't have to feel sorry for me. I'm a superwoman, and I'll get you an apartment, she stated. Infinite Spirit, clear the way for the right apartment, she concluded. She knew there was an offer for every need. She was working on the spiritual plane unconditionally and recognized that one with God is the majority. She had considered buying new bedspreads when the tempter, the adverse thought, or the reasoning mind suggested she not do so, because if she couldn't get the apartment, she would keep them. I'll test my faith and plow my own ditches buying the bedspreads, he thought, and prepared for the apartment. He acted as if he already had it. He miraculously found one, and it was given to him despite there being over 200 other applicants. The bedspreads demonstrated an act of faith. Needless to say, the trenches dug by the 3 kings in the desert were filled to overflowing. For the average person, it's not easy to enter the spiritual rhythm. The adverse thoughts of doubt and fear arise from the subconscious. They are an army of aliens that we must overcome. This explains why the darkest period of the night always occurs before dawn. A great demonstration is often preceded by tormenting thoughts. By making a declaration of high spiritual truth, one challenges old subconscious beliefs and exposes error, thereby nullifying it. This is the time when one should make one's affirmations of truth repeatedly and rejoice and give thanks for having received. Before you call, I will answer you. This means that every good and perfect gift already belongs to the person who is waiting for its recognition. Man can only receive what he sees himself receiving. The children of Israel were told they could have all the land they could see. This is true for every man. They can only have the land they see within their own mind. Every great work, every great achievement has been manifested through keeping the vision, and often just before great achievement comes apparent failure and discouragement. The children of Israel, when they arrived in the promised land, were afraid to enter because they said it was full of giants who made them feel like grasshoppers. And there we saw the giants, and we felt, in our own sight, like grasshoppers. This is the experience of almost all men. However, he who knows the spiritual law is not disturbed by the appearance, and rejoices while still in captivity. That is, he holds fast to his vision and gives thanks because the end has been fulfilled. He has been received. Jesus Christ gave a wonderful example of this. He said to his disciples, "Do you not say that there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already ripe for harvest." His clear vision pierced the world of matter and clearly saw the world of the fourth dimension, things as they truly are, perfect and complete in the divine mind. So man must always maintain the vision of the end of his journey and demand the manifestation of what he has already received. It may be his perfect health, love, provision, personal expression, home, or friends. All are finished and perfect ideas recorded in the divine mind, man's own superconscious mind, and they must come through him, not to him. A man asked me to help him succeed. He needed to raise $50,000 for his business within a certain time frame, and that deadline was about to expire when he came to me, desperate. No one wanted to invest in his company, and the bank had flatly refused him a loan. I suppose you lost your temper while you were at the bank, and therefore your power. You can control any situation if you first control yourself. Go back to the bank. Identify yourself in love with the spirit of everyone connected with the bank, and let the divine idea emerge from this situation. I instructed him. Woman, that's simply impossible. Tomorrow is Saturday. The bank closes at 12, and the train doesn't leave until 10. The deadline is tomorrow, and they won't do it anyway. It's too late. God doesn't need time, and it's never too late. With him, anything is possible, I countered. I don't know anything about business, but I know everything about God. Everything sounds wonderful when I sit here listening to you, but when I go out and face the outside world, it's terrible. He lived in a distant city, and I didn't hear from him for a week, until I received a letter telling me I'd been right, that he'd gotten the money, and that he would never again doubt the truth I'd told him. What happened? I asked him when I saw him several weeks later. Obviously, you even had some extra time. My train was delayed, and I arrived at 15 to 12. I walked into the bank calmly and said, "I've come for the loan," and they gave it to me without question. It was the last 15 minutes of his allotted time, and the Infinite Spirit arrived not too late. In this case, the man couldn't have manifested alone. He needed someone to help him maintain the vision. This is what one man can do for another man. Jesus Christ knew the truth of this when he said, "If 2 of you on earth agree about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven." One gets too involved in his own affairs and becomes doubtful and fearful. The friend, or healer, clearly sees success, health, or prosperity, and never wavers because he is not close to the situation. It is much easier to plan for someone else than for oneself, so a person should not hesitate to ask for help if they feel wavering. A keen observer of life once said that no man could fail if another saw him succeed. Such is the power of vision. Many great men have owed their success to a wife, a sister, or a friend who believed in them blindly, ensuring that they remained, without wavering, the perfect model. The power of the word. By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. A person who knows the power of words becomes very careful with their conversation. They only have to observe the reaction to their words to know that they do not return empty. Through their spoken word, a person is continually making laws for themselves. I knew a man who said he could never get a taxi, that they always left just as he went out to pick them up. However, his daughter said the opposite was true for her. There was always a taxi waiting for her when she needed one, and so it was for both of them for years. Each had made a different law for themselves, one of failure and one of success. This is the psychology of superstitions. The horseshoe or the rabbit's foot contain no power, but a person's word and the belief that it will bring good luck creates expectation in the subconscious mind and attracts fortunate situations. However, I find this doesn't work when a person has advanced spiritually and knows a higher law. One cannot go back and must put away previously carved images. For example, 2 men attending my class had been enjoying great business success for several months when everything suddenly collapsed. We tried to analyze the situation, and I discovered that instead of making their affirmations and seeking God for success and prosperity, each had purchased a lucky monkey charm. "I see. You've been trusting in the lucky monkeys instead of God," I said. "Better leave the lucky monkeys and invoke the law of forgiveness, for man has the power to forgive or neutralize his mistakes." They decided to throw the lucky monkeys down a well, and everything was fine again. This doesn't mean, however, that one should throw away all the lucky ornaments or horseshoes in the house, but rather that one should recognize that the power behind them is God's, and that is the only power. The object simply gives us a feeling of expectation. One day, I was with a friend who was very desperate. As she crossed the street, she saw a horseshoe and picked it up, immediately filled with joy and hope. She said God had sent her the horseshoe to give her courage. At that moment, that was the only thing her conscience could accept, and her hope turned into faith. It was a wonderful demonstration. I want to make it clear that the men mentioned above relied on the monkeys themselves, while this woman recognized the power represented in the horseshoe. It took me a long time to accept the reality that something could cause us disappointment. If this something happened, disappointment would invariably follow. The only way I could make a change in the subconscious was by affirming, there are not 2 powers, there is only one power, and that power is God. Therefore, there are no disappointments. And this something means nothing more than a happy surprise. I immediately noticed a change, and happy surprises began to come to me. I have a friend who said that nothing could convince her to walk under a ladder. I told her that if she was afraid, she was yielding to the belief in 2 powers, good and evil, instead of one. Since God is absolute, there can be no opposing power, unless man does evil to himself. I also suggested that, to demonstrate her belief in the sole power of God, and to show that there was no power or reality in evil, she should walk under the next ladder she saw. Shortly after, she went to her bank because she needed access to her safe, and in her way was a ladder. It was impossible to reach the safe without going under the ladder. She trembled with fear and turned around. She couldn't face the lion on its way. However, when she reached the street, my words rang in her ears, and she decided to go back and go under it. It was a great moment in her life, as the ladders had kept her enslaved for years. She went back to the vault, and the ladder was no longer there. This happens very often. If you are willing to do something you are afraid of, chances are, when you are willing to face it, you will no longer have to do it. It is the law of non-resistance, which is so difficult to understand. Someone has said that courage contains genius and magic. Face a situation without fear, and there is no situation to face. It falls under its own weight. The explanation is that fear attracted the ladder to the woman's path, and fearlessness removed it. Thus, invisible forces are always working for the man, who is always pulling the strings himself, even if he doesn't know it. Because of the vibratory power of words, everything a person expresses begins to be attracted. People who continually talk about illness invariably attract it. Once a person knows the truth, they must be extremely careful with their words. For example, I have a friend who often calls me to invite me to an old-fashioned conversation. This old-fashioned conversation results in an hour of destructive words, whose main themes are loss, lack, failure, and illness. I reply that I decline the invitation, that I appreciate it, but that I've had enough old-fashioned conversations in my life, and they usually come at a price. However, I offer him the alternative of having a modern conversation and talking about what we want instead of what we don't want. There's an old saying that a person only dares to use his words for three purposes: to heal, to bless, or to prosper. What a person says about others will be said about him, and what he wishes for another, he wishes for himself. Curses are like hens. They come home at the right time of sleep. If a person wishes bad luck on another, he is sure to bring bad luck upon himself. If he wishes to help someone succeed, he is both wishing and helping himself to succeed. The body can be renewed and transformed through the spoken word and clear vision, and illness can be completely eliminated from consciousness. The metaphysician knows that every illness has a mental correspondence, and to cure the body, one must cure the soul. The soul is the subconscious mind and must be saved from erroneous thinking. In the 23rd Psalm we read, "He restores my soul." This means that the subconscious mind, or soul, must be restored with right ideas, and the mystical marriage is the marriage of soul and spirit, or of the subconscious and superconscious minds. They must be one. When the subconscious is flooded with the perfect ideas of the superconscious, God and man are one. I and the Father are one. That is, man is one with the realm of perfect ideas. He is made in the likeness and image of God, imagination, and is given power and dominion over all created things, his mind, his body, and his affairs. It can be said that all illness and unhappiness stem from the violation of the law of love. A new commandment I give you: love one another. And in the game of life, love or goodwill wins all the cards. For example, a woman I know had a terrible skin disease for years. Doctors told her it was incurable, and she was desperate. She worked on the stage and feared that she would soon have to leave her profession because she had no other means of support. Despite her fear, she landed a good contract, and on opening night, she was a huge success. She received praise from critics and felt happy and euphoric. However, the next day, she received a termination notice because a co-star was jealous of her success and had gotten her fired. She felt hatred and resentment take over completely, and she pleaded, "God, don't let me hate that man." That night, she worked for hours in silence. She told me that she had entered into a very profound silence and seemed at peace with herself, with humanity, and with the entire world. She continued this way for the next 2 nights, and on the 3rd day, she discovered that she was completely cured of the skin disease. By asking for love, or goodwill, I had fulfilled the law, for love is the fulfillment of the law, and the disease, which stemmed from subconscious resentment, was eliminated. Constant criticism produces rheumatism, as critical and inharmonious thoughts cause unnatural deposits in the blood that settle in the joints. Jealousy, hatred, unforgiveness, fear, etc. cause false growth. All disease is caused by an unsettled mind. I once told my class that it was useless to ask someone what was wrong with them. It was better to ask them who was wrong with them. Lack of forgiveness is the most prolific cause of illness. It hardens the arteries or the liver, affects the eyesight, and there are countless other ills in its path. One day, I visited a woman who told me she was sick from eating a poisoned oyster. I replied that wasn't the case, but that she had attracted the fateful mollusk. Quite annoyed, she told me that couldn't be true, that it was impossible that, out of 19 diners, she alone had attracted the spoiled oyster. However, she had argued with these 19 people and had become very upset, falling into disharmony, which had attracted the wrong oyster to her plate. Any disharmony on the outside indicates a disharmony of the mind. As on the inside, so on the outside. Man's only enemies are within himself. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. Personality is one of the last enemies to be conquered, as this planet is barely in the initiation stage of love. Christ's message was peace on earth and goodwill toward men. The enlightened man, therefore, strives to perfect himself in his fellow man. His work is with himself, to send goodwill and blessings to every man. And the wonderful thing is that if one blesses a man, that man has no power to harm him. A man came to me asking for ministering to him for success in business. He was selling machinery when a rival appeared on the scene with a machine he claimed was far better, and my friend feared defeat. I told him that, first of all, he must eliminate all fear, feel assured that God was protecting his interests, and that out of that situation would come a divine idea. That is, the right machine would be sold to the right man. I suggested that he not have a single critical thought toward that man, but rather bless him all day long. And I also added that he should be willing not to sell his machine if it was not the divine idea. The man went to the meeting, fearless and without resistance, and blessed the other man. He said the result was remarkable. The other man's machine refused to work, and he sold his own without the slightest difficulty. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat you and persecute you. Goodwill produces a great aura of protection around the person who sends it, and no weapon formed against it will prosper. In other words, love and goodwill destroy enemies within oneself, so one has no enemies on the outside. There is peace on earth for him who sends goodwill to man. The law of non-resistance. Do not resist evil. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Nothing on earth can resist a completely non-resistant person. The Chinese say that water is the most powerful element because it is perfectly non-resistant. It can wear down a rock and sweep everything before it, while remaining malleable and soft. Jesus Christ said, "Do not resist evil," because he knew that in reality there is no evil. Therefore, there is nothing to resist. Evil has come from man's vain imagination, or from the belief in two powers, good and evil. There is an ancient legend that Adam and Eve ate from Maya, the tree of illusion, and saw two powers instead of the one power of God. Therefore, evil is a false law that man has made for himself through psychoma, or soul sleep. Soul sleep means that man's soul has been hypnotized by the belief of the race, of sin, sickness, and death, etc., which is carnal or mortal thought, and his affairs have surpassed his illusions. We read in a previous chapter that a man's soul is his subconscious mind, and everything he deeply feels, good or bad, is externalized by that faithful servant. His body and his affairs show what he has been imagining. The sick person has represented illness, the poor person, poverty, the rich person, Wealth. People often wonder why a small child attracts illness when he is too young, even to know what it means. I reply that children are sensitive and receptive to others' thoughts about them, and often externalize their parents' fears. I once heard a metaphysician say, "If you don't direct your subconscious yourself, someone else will." Mothers, often unconsciously, attract illness and disharmony to their children by continually keeping them wrapped up in fearful thoughts and watching for symptoms. A friend asked a woman if her little girl had had measles, to which she immediately replied that she hadn't yet. This implied that she was waiting for the illness and therefore preparing the way for exactly what she didn't want to happen. However, the person who is centered and established in right thinking, the person who sends only goodwill to their neighbor, and who is without fear, cannot be touched or influenced by the negative thoughts of others. In fact, they might then receive only good thoughts, since they themselves send only good thoughts. Resistance is hell, for it places a person in a state of torment. A metaphysician gave me a wonderful recipe for avoiding tricks in the game of life, the magic of non-resistance, and he shared it with me in the following way. He told me that, at one time in his life, he had baptized children, and that he had discovered many names in doing so. However, he confessed to me that now he no longer baptizes children, but rather events. But to each event, he gives the same name. If he has a failure, he baptizes it successfully, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Here we can see the great law of transmutation founded on non-resistance. Through his word, every failure was transmuted into success. A woman who needed money and knew the spiritual law of opulence regularly did business with a man who made her feel very poor. He spoke of lack and limitations, and she began to absorb his thoughts of poverty, which led her to dislike him and blame him for her failure. She knew that, to demonstrate her magnificence, she must first feel that she had received. Her feeling of opulence must precede its manifestation. One day, he realized he was resisting the situation and seeing two powers instead of one. So he blessed the man and christened the situation a success. He stated, "Since there is only one power, and that is God's, this man is here for my good and prosperity." The exact opposite of what seemed to be happening. Shortly thereafter, through this man, he met a woman who paid him several $1,000s for a service, and the man moved to a distant city, harmoniously fading from her life. Make this affirmation: every man is a golden link in the chain of my good. All men are God in manifestation, waiting for the opportunity that man himself gives him to serve the divine plan of his life. Bless your enemy, and you will rob him of his ammunition. His arrows will be transmuted into blessings. This law applies to nations as well as individuals. Bless a nation, send love and goodwill to each of its inhabitants, and its power to harm will be removed. Only through spiritual understanding can man have the correct idea of non-resistance. My students have often said that they do not want to be anyone's doormat, to which I reply that if they use non-resistance wisely, no one will be able to step over them. Another example. One day I was impatiently waiting for an important phone call, so I resisted making calls, thinking they might interfere with the one I was waiting for. Instead of saying, "Divine ideas never conflict. The call will come at the right time," letting infinite intelligence handle it, I began to handle things myself and made the battle my own instead of leaving it in God's hands. I didn't receive any calls for about an hour, and when I looked at my phone, I discovered that the receiver was disconnected. My anxiety, fear, and belief in interference had caused me to not check my phone, creating the situation. Realizing what I had done, I immediately began blessing the situation. I christened it a success and affirmed that I couldn't miss any call that belonged to me by divine right, for I was under grace, not law. A friend of mine ran to the nearest phone to notify the company and get my service back on. He went into a crowded grocery store, but the owner left his customers alone and made the call himself. They reconnected my phone immediately, and 2 minutes later, I received a very important call. About an hour later, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Ships arrive on a calm sea. As long as a man resists a situation, he will attract it to himself. If he runs away from it, it will chase him. One day, I repeated this to a woman, and she replied that it was very true. She was unhappy at home, disliked her mother because she was critical and domineering, and that's why she had decided to flee the situation and get married. However, she confessed to me that she had married her own mother because her husband acted exactly the same, and she had to face the same experience. Come to an agreement with your adversary quickly. That means agreeing that the adverse situation is good. It means not being bothered by it and letting it fall of its own accord. "None of these things move me" is a wonderful statement. The inharmonious situation stems from the lack of harmony within man himself. When there is no emotional response to an inharmonious situation, it vanishes forever. Therefore, we see that man's work is always with himself. There are people who have asked me to minister to them so that their partners or family members' attitudes change. But I tell them that I should minister to them, and that when they change, their partners or family members will too. One of my students had a habit of lying. I told her it was a failed method, and that if she lied, she would be lied to too. However, she replied that she didn't care, because she didn't know how to face life without lying. One day, I was on the phone with a man I was deeply in love with. She turned to me and told me she didn't trust him, and that she knew he was lying to her. I replied that she was lying, and that therefore, someone would lie to her in return, and that this lie would come from someone truly important in her life. I saw her sometime later, and she confessed that she had been cured and no longer lied. When I asked her what had brought about the change, she replied that she had been living with someone who lied even more than she did. We often heal ourselves of our defects by seeing them in others. Life is a mirror, and we usually find ourselves reflected in the people around us. Living in the past is a method of failure and a violation of spiritual law. Jesus Christ said, "Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. The thieves of time are the past and the future. Man must bless the past and forget it, for it keeps him in bondage. He must bless the future, knowing that it holds infinite joys for him as he lives fully in the now. A woman came to see me, complaining that she didn't have any money to buy Christmas gifts. She told me that last year had been very different. She had plenty of money and had given away some beautiful gifts, but this year she barely had a few cents. I told her that I wouldn't manifest any money as long as she maintained a pathetic attitude and lived in the past. I advised her to live fully in the now and prepare to give away her Christmas gifts. Dig your ditches, and the money will come. "I know what to do," she exclaimed. "I'll buy some paper and ribbons and even some Christmas boxes." "Do it, and the gifts will arrive to be wrapped in your ribbons," I told him. This also showed financial fearlessness and faith in God, as the reasoning mind told him to save every penny because he wasn't sure he'd ever receive more. He bought the ribbons, paper, and boxes, and a few days before Christmas, he received a gift worth several $100s. The purchase of the ribbons and paper had impressed the subconscious with expectation, paving the way for the manifestation of the money. He bought all the gifts with plenty of time. Man must live suspended in the moment. Look well then, this day. Such is the greeting of the dawn. His spirit must always remain alert, listening for clues and taking advantage of every opportunity. One day, I asked the Infinite Spirit not to allow me to miss any opportunity. I repeated this many times and received a very important message that same night. It is also very necessary to start the day with the right words. You can make an affirmation immediately upon waking, such as, "Thy will be done today. Today is a day of plenitude. I give thanks for this perfect day. Miracle will follow miracle, and wonders will never cease." Make this a habit, and you will see wonders and miracles reflected in your lives. In one of my daily readings, I came across this phrase, "Look in amazement at what is before you." It seemed to be my message for the day, so I repeated it over and over again. Around noon, I was given a large sum of money that I had been desiring for a certain purpose. In another chapter, I will provide the affirmations I have found most effective. However, one should never use an affirmation unless it is absolutely satisfactory and convincing to one's own conscience, and they often need to be changed to suit different people. For example, this one has brought success to many. "I have a wonderful job that I perform in a wonderful way, and I provide wonderful service for wonderful pay." I provided the first 2 lines to one of my students, and she added the last 2. It was a very powerful phrase, as there should always be perfect payment for perfect service, and the rhyme easily sinks into the subconscious. She began singing it aloud, and soon received an offer for a wonderful job in a wonderful way. And she performed wonderful service in return for wonderful pay. Another student, a businessman, took it and changed the word job to business. "I have a wonderful business. I perform wonderfully, and I provide wonderful service for wonderful pay." That afternoon, he made $41,000 in business, even though he hadn't had any significant activity in his company for months. Each statement must be carefully worded, and it must cover all needs. I knew a woman who was very needy and demanded that she be given a lot of work. She received it in large quantities, but was never paid. Now she knows she must add to the wonderful wages. Man has a divine right to abundance, more than enough. His barns must be full, and his cup must run over. This is God's idea for man, and when man breaks through the barriers of lack in his own consciousness, the golden age will be his, and every righteous desire of his heart will be fulfilled. The law of karma and the law of forgiveness. Man receives only what he gives. The game of life is a game of boomerangs. A man's thoughts, deeds, and words come back to him sooner or later, and with astonishing accuracy. This is the law of karma, which in Sanskrit means return. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. A friend told me this story about herself that illustrates this law perfectly. She told me she had a karmic cycle with her aunt, that everything she said to her, someone else repeated back to her. One day, when she was a little irritable, she asked her not to speak to him during dinner, as she wished to eat in peace. The next day, she sat down to dinner with a woman on whom she wished to make a great impression and began talking animatedly to her. And this person asked her not to speak to her anymore because she wished to eat in peace. My friend is on a higher plane of consciousness, so her karma returns much more quickly than that of those on the mental plane. The more a person knows, the more responsible they are, and a person with knowledge of spiritual law who does not practice it suffers greatly. The fear of the Lord, law, is the beginning of wisdom. If we read the word Lord, law, it will make many passages of the Bible much clearer. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord, law. It is the law that takes vengeance, not God. God sees perfect man, created in his image and likeness, imagination, and gives him power and dominion. This is the perfect idea of man, recorded in the divine mind, awaiting man's own recognition, for man can only be what he sees or believes he is, and can only achieve what he sees or believes he can achieve. There is an ancient saying that nothing happens without an observer. Man first sees his failure or success, his joy or sadness, before it becomes visible from the scene staged in his own imagination. We have observed this in the mother who imagines her child's illness, or in the woman who sees her husband's success. Jesus Christ said, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Thus, we see that freedom from all unhappy conditions comes through knowledge of spiritual law. Obedience precedes authority, and the law obeys man when he obeys the law. The law of electricity must be obeyed before it becomes man's servant. When handled ignorantly, it becomes man's mortal enemy. The same is true of the laws of the mind. I knew a woman with a strong will who longed to own a house belonging to an acquaintance, and she often imagined herself living there. Eventually, the man died, and she moved into the house. Several years later, having learned about spiritual law, she asked me if I believed her desire had something to do with the man's death. I told her that her desire had been so strong that because of it, everything had been arranged so that she would obtain the house. However, I reassured her by saying that she had already paid her karmic debt, as the husband she loved devotedly had died shortly afterward, and the house proved to be a white elephant for her for many years. However, the original owner could not have been affected by her thoughts if her attitude had been positive, and she acted on the truth, just like her husband, but both were under karmic law. The woman should have said, feeling the great desire to possess that house, something like this: "Infinite intelligence, give me the right house, equally lovely like this one, a house that be mine by divine right." Divine selection would have given perfect satisfaction and brought good to all. The divine pattern is the only safe pattern under which to work. Desire is a tremendous force, and it must be directed into the right channels, or chaos will ensue. When making a declaration, the most important step is the first: asking correctly. A man should always demand only what is his by divine right. Returning to the example, if the woman had changed her words, desiring the house only if it was her divine choice, the man might have decided to move harmoniously, or it would have been replaced by another house. Anything forced into manifestation through personal will is ruined and has no good success. Man is told, "My will, not yours, be done." And the curious thing is that man always gets exactly what he desires when he relinquishes his personal will, thus allowing infinite intelligence to work through him. Be still and see the salvation of the Lord. Law. A woman came to me in great distress. Her daughter had decided to take a very dangerous journey, and she was filled with fear. She said she had used every argument, pointed out the dangers she would encounter, and forbade her from going. But the daughter grew increasingly rebellious and determined. I told the mother that she was imposing her personal will on her daughter, which she had no right to do, and that her fear of the journey only attracted danger, for a man attracts what he fears. I instructed her to let go, to remove her mental hands, and to place it in God's hands, using this affirmation: "I place this situation in the hands of infinite love and wisdom. If this trip is divinely planned, I bless it and no longer resist it. But if it is not divinely planned, I give thanks that it will now dissolve and dissipate." A day or two later, her daughter told her she had given up on the trip, and the mother suffered no further distress. It is learning to be still, which seems so difficult for man. I will deal more fully with this law in the chapter on non-resistance. Here, I will give another example of sowing and reaping, which came about in the most curious way. A woman came to me to tell me that she had received a counterfeit $20 bill from a bank, and she was very worried because she believed the staff would never recognize their mistake. I asked her if we could analyze the situation and find out why she had attracted this attention. She thought for a few moments and remembered sending some toy bills to a friend as part of a joke, so the law had sent her toy money in return, for she doesn't understand jokes. I told her we would invoke the law of forgiveness, thus neutralizing the situation. Christianity is based on the law of forgiveness. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of karmic law, and the Christ within each of us is our own Redeemer and salvation from all inharmonious conditions. Infinite Spirit, we invoke the law of forgiveness and give thanks that she is under grace and not under law, and cannot lose these $20 which are hers by divine right, I said. Now go back to the bank and tell them, without fear, that it was given to you there by mistake. She obeyed, and to her surprise, they apologized and gave her another bill, treating her very courteously. Knowledge of the law gives a person the power to erase his mistakes, and one cannot force external things to be what they are not. If you desire riches, you must first be rich in conscience. A woman asked me to preach so that she would receive prosperity. She didn't take much interest in her household affairs, and her house was very messy. So I told her that if she wanted to be rich, she must be orderly. I added that all men with great wealth are orderly. That order is the first law of heaven, and that she would never become rich by keeping a burnt match in a pincushion. She had a good sense of humor and immediately began putting her house in order. She rearranged the furniture, arranged the table drawers, cleaned the carpets, and soon a major financial demonstration arrived in the form of a gift from a relative. The woman, for her part, remains financially fit. Her house and person remain in order, and she is always attentive to the external, expecting prosperity, knowing that God is her supply. Many people are unaware that gifts and things are investments, and that hoarding and saving invariably lead to loss. There is one who scatters, yet increases, and there is one who withholds more than he should, yet tends toward poverty. For example, I knew a man who wanted to buy a fur coat. He and his wife went to several stores, but there wasn't one he liked. He said they were all too cheap. Finally, they showed him one that, according to the salesman, was valued at $1,000. But the manager would sell it to him for $500, since the season was almost over. His financial holdings amounted to about $700. So the reasoning mind would have warned him that he couldn't afford to spend almost everything he had on a coat. However, he was very intuitive and somewhat impulsive, so he rarely reasoned. He went to his wife and told her that if she bought that coat, she would earn a lot of money, so she weakly agreed to his wish. A month later, he received a commission of $10,000. The coat made him feel very rich, and he associated it with success and prosperity. Without the coat, he would not have received the commission. It was an investment that paid huge dividends. If a person ignores these guidelines for spending or giving, the same amount of money will go down an uninteresting or unhappy path. A woman told me she had informed her family that they couldn't afford Thanksgiving dinner that year. She had the money, but had decided to save it. A few days later, someone came into her room and took from her dresser drawer the exact amount the dinner would have cost. The law always backs the man who spends fearlessly, wisely. One of my students was shopping with her young nephew, and the boy clamored for a toy, but she told him he couldn't buy it. She realized she was seeking lack, not recognizing God as her supply. So she bought the toy, and on her way home, she found the exact amount of money she had paid for it lying on the street. A man's supply is inexhaustible and infallible when one trusts fully, but faith or trust must precede demonstration. According to your faith, be it given to you. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. For faith keeps the vision steadfast. Adverse images dissolve and vanish, and in due time we will reap, provided we do not lose heart. Jesus Christ brought the good news, the gospel, that there was a higher law, one that transcended the law of karma. It is the law of grace, or forgiveness, the law that frees man from the law of cause and effect, the law of consequences. Under grace and not under law. We are told that on this plane, man reaps where he has not sown. God's gifts are simply poured out upon him. All that the kingdom offers is his. This continued state of bliss awaits the man who has overcome the thought of race, or the world. In the thought of the world, there is tribulation, but Jesus Christ said, "Be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." The thought of the world is that of sin, sickness, and death. He saw their utter unreality and said, "Sickness and sorrow will pass away, and death itself, the greatest enemy, will be conquered." We now know, from a scientific point of view, that death could be overcome by imprinting on the subconscious mind the conviction of eternal youth and eternal life. The undirected subconscious follows orders without question. Working under the direction of the superconscious, the Christ or God within man, the resurrection of the body would be achieved. Man would no longer shed his body at death. He would be transformed into the electric body described by Walt Whitman. For Christianity is founded on the forgiveness of sins and an empty tomb. Delegating the load, impressing the subconscious. When man knows his own powers and the workings of his mind, his great desire is to find an easy and quick way to impress the subconscious with good, since mere intellectual knowledge of the truth will not bring results. In my own case, I found the easiest way is to delegate the load. A metaphysician once explained it this way: the only thing that gives weight to anything in nature is the law of gravitation. And if a boulder could be carried high above the planet, there would be no weight on that boulder. That is what Jesus Christ meant when he said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." He had risen above the vibration of the world and functioned in the fourth dimensional realm where there is only perfection, completion, life, and joy. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." We are also told to cast your burden upon the Lord in the 55th Psalm. Many passages in the Bible affirm that the battle is God's, not man's, and that man must always be still and see the Lord's salvation. This indicates that the superconscious mind, or inner Christ, is the department that fights man's battle and frees him from burdens. We see then that man violates the law if he carries a burden, and a burden is an adverse thought or condition, and this thought or condition has its root in the subconscious. It seems almost impossible to make progress by directing the subconscious from the conscious or reasoning mind, since the reasoning mind, the intellect, is limited in its conceptions and full of doubts and fears. How scientific it is, then, to cast the burden upon the superconscious mind, or inner Christ, where it either makes light or dissolves into nothingness. A woman in urgent need of money delegates the burden to the inner Christ, the superconscious, with the affirmation, "I cast this burden of lack upon the inner Christ and free myself to have abundance." The belief in lack was her burden, and by casting it upon the superconscious with its belief in abundance, she received an avalanche of supplies. We read, "The Christ in you, the hope of glory." One of my students had been given a new piano, but there was no room for it in her studio unless she got rid of the old one. She was confused. She wanted to keep the piano, but had nowhere to send it, and she was desperate because the new one would be shipped immediately. In fact, it was already on its way. It was then that she decided to repeat, "I throw this burden upon the Christ within, and I am free." Moments later, her phone rang, and a friend asked if she could rent her old piano, taking it off her hands just minutes before the new one arrived. I met a woman burdened with resentment who began repeating, "I throw this burden of resentment into the Christ within and free myself to be loving, harmonious, and happy." The almighty superconscious flooded the subconscious with love, and her whole life changed. For years, resentment had kept her in a state of torment and imprisoned her soul, the subconscious mind. This affirmation should be repeated over and over again, sometimes for hours, silently or audibly, calmly and purposefully. I have often compared it to winding an antique clock. We must wind ourselves up with spoken words. I've noticed that by delegating the burden, one seems to see clearly. It's impossible to have a clear vision while in the throes of the carnal mind. Doubts and fear poison the mind and body, and the imagination runs wild, attracting disaster and illness. Vision becomes clearer by constantly repeating the affirmation, "I cast this burden upon the Christ within, and I am free." With it comes a feeling of relief, and sooner or later the manifestation of good, whether health, happiness, or provision comes. One of my students asked me to explain the phrase, "The darkness is always worst before the dawn." I referred in a previous chapter to the fact that everything seems to get worse before the big demonstration, and a deep depression clouds the consciousness. It means that the same old doubts and fears arise from the subconscious. These old abandonments of the subconscious rise to the surface to be extinguished. It is then that man must beat his drums, like Jehoshaphat, and give thanks for being saved, even though he seems to be surrounded by the enemy, the situation of lack or illness. The student asked how long one should remain in the darkness, to which I replied that it should be until one could see through it, and when one delegates the burden, one can achieve it. Active faith is essential to impress the subconscious. Faith without works is dead, and in these chapters, I have endeavored to make this point clear. Jesus Christ displayed active faith when he commanded the multitude to sit on the ground before giving thanks for the loaves and fishes. I will give another example that shows how necessary this step is. In fact, active faith is the bridge over which man passes into his promised land. A woman had separated from her husband, whom she loved deeply, because of a misunderstanding. He rejected all offers of reconciliation and would not communicate with her in any way. Upon coming to the knowledge of spiritual law, she denied the appearance of separation and declared that there is no separation in the divine mind, and, therefore, she could not be separated from the love and companionship that were hers by divine right. She demonstrated active faith by setting a place for him at the table every day, thus impressing her subconscious with an image of his return. More than a year passed, but she never wavered, and one day, he finally returned. The subconscious is often impressed through music. It has a fourth-dimensional quality and frees the soul from its confinement, making wonderful things seem possible and easy to accomplish. I have a friend who uses her old record player daily for this purpose. It puts her in perfect harmony and frees the imagination. Another woman often dances while making her affirmations. The rhythm and harmony of the music and movement carry her words with tremendous power. The student must also remember not to disregard small signs. Invariably, before a manifestation, certain signs will arrive. Before Columbus reached America, he saw birds and twigs that indicated land was near. The same thing happens with a demonstration, but often the student mistakes it for his own imagination and is disappointed. A woman had manifested a set of dishes. Shortly afterward, a friend gave her an old, cracked plate and came to see me to confess her disappointment. She had ordered a set of dishes, and all she had now was this almost broken plate. I replied that the plate was simply the first sign that showed her the set was about to arrive, and I suggested she view it like the birds and branches Columbus had seen. Her new plates were not long in coming. Making believe continually impresses the subconscious. If one imagines believing that one is rich, and imagines believing that one is successful, one will reap in due time. Children are always imagining. Except you be converted and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. For example, I know of a woman who was very poor, but no one could make her feel poor. She earned a small amount of money from some wealthy friends, who constantly reminded her of her poverty and suggested she be careful and save. Despite their warnings, she spent everything she earned on a hat or gave someone a gift, and she was in an exultant mood. Her thoughts always focused on beautiful clothes, rings, and other accessories, but she never envied others. She lived in a world of wonder, and only riches seemed real to her. Soon, she married a rich man, and the rings and other luxurious things became visible. I don't know if the man was her divine selection, but opulence had to manifest itself in her life, since she had only imagined herself in opulence. There will be no peace or happiness for man until he has erased all fear from the subconscious. Fear is a misdirected energy and must be transmuted into faith. Jesus Christ said, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" All things are possible to him who believes. My students often ask me how they can free themselves from fear, and I tell them the best way is to approach what they fear. The lion takes its fierceness from your fear. Approach the lion, and it will disappear. Flee, and it will run after you. In previous chapters, I have shown how the lion of lack disappeared when the individual spent money fearlessly, showing faith that God was their supply and therefore infallible. Many of my students have emerged from the bondage of poverty, and now, after losing all fear of letting money out, are abundantly supplied. The subconscious is impressed with the truth that God is the giver and the gift. Therefore, as one is one with the giver, one is one with the gift. This is a splendid statement. For too long, man has separated himself from his good and his supply through thoughts of separation and lack. And sometimes dynamite is needed to dislodge these false ideas from the subconscious. Sometimes dynamite is simply a situation. In the previous example, we see how the individual freed himself from his bondage by showing fearlessness. Man must monitor himself hourly to detect whether his motive for action is fear or faith. Choose today whom we will serve, fear or faith. Perhaps one's fear is of personality. Then, one needn't avoid the people we fear. One must be willing to joyfully encounter them, and they will prove to be golden links in the chain of our good, or they will harmoniously disappear from our path. Perhaps the fear is of disease or germs. In that case, one should remain fearless and undisturbed in a germ-laden situation, and one would be immune. One can only contract germs while vibrating at the same rate as the germ, and fear draws man down to the vibrational level of the germ. Of course, the disease-laden germ is the product of the carnal mind, as all thought must objectify. Germs do not exist in the superconscious or the divine mind. Therefore, they are the product of man's vain imagination. Man's liberation will come in a twinkling when he realizes that there is no power in evil. The material world will fade away, and the world of the fourth dimension, the world of wonder, will come into manifestation. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying. Neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. Love. All men on this planet are initiated into love. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Ouspensky states in his book Tertium Organum, love is a cosmic phenomenon and opens to man the world of the fourth dimension, the world of wonder. True love is selfless and free from fear. It pours itself out upon the object of its affection without demanding anything in return, and its joy lies in the joy of giving. Love is God in manifestation and the strongest magnetic force in the universe. Pure, selfless love attracts its own. It needs neither seeking nor demanding. Hardly anyone has the slightest idea of what true love is. Man is selfish, tyrannical, or fearful in his affections, thus losing what he loves. Jealousy is love's worst enemy, for the imagination runs wild when it sees the loved one attracted to another, and invariably these fears, if not neutralized, materialize. A woman came to me in great distress. The man she loved had left her for other women, and said he had never intended to marry her. She was torn with jealousy and resentment, and said she hoped he suffered as much as he had made her suffer, questioning how he could have left her if she loved him so much. I got her to reconsider by stating that she didn't love him, but rather hated him, and that she could never receive what she hadn't given. If one gives perfect love, one receives perfect love, and she could perfect this man. I told her to offer him perfect, selfless love, demanding nothing in return, without criticism or condemnation, and to bless him no matter where he was. She replied that she wouldn't bless him if she didn't know where he was, and I made it clear that this wasn't true love, and that only when she sent out real love would real love return to her, whether from this man or his equivalent. Furthermore, if this man wasn't her divine selection, she wouldn't want to keep him. When we are one with God, we are one with the love that belongs to us by divine right. Several months passed, and things remained more or less the same. But she was working conscientiously on herself. I told her that when she was no longer bothered by his cruelty, he would stop being cruel, since she was attracting him through her own emotions. Then I told her about a sisterhood in India that had replaced good morning with the phrase, "I salute the divinity within you." They saluted the divinity in every person and in the wild animals of the jungle, whom they never harmed because they saw only God in every living being. I asked her to salute the divinity in this man and repeat, "I see only your divine self. I see you as God sees you, perfect, made in his image and likeness." She noticed that she was becoming more balanced and slowly losing her resentment. He was a captain, and she nicknamed him Copy. One day, suddenly, and without much thought, she said, "May God bless the Copy, wherever he may be." I assured her that this was true love, and that when she had come full circle and was no longer bothered by this situation, she would have his love or attract an equivalent. At the time, I was moving and didn't have a phone, so I had no contact with her for a few weeks. Shortly after, I received a letter telling me they were married. I called her as soon as I could to hear what had happened, and she told me that one day she woke up without any pain, and that same night he had proposed to her. They were married a week later, and he seemed like the most devout man. There's an old saying that goes, "No man is your enemy, no man is your friend, all men are your teachers." One must become impersonal and learn what each person has to teach us, and soon we will learn their lessons and be free. The woman's lover was teaching her the selfless love that every man, sooner or later, must learn. Suffering is not necessary for human development. It is the result of violating spiritual law, but few people seem able to awaken from their soul sleep without it. Sometimes people who are happy become selfish, and this automatically activates the law of karma. Men often suffer losses because they don't appreciate what they have. I knew a woman who had a very nice husband. She kept saying that, even though they got along well, she wasn't interested in being married. She had other interests, barely remembered she had a husband, and only thought about him when she saw him. One day her husband told her he was in love with another woman and left her. She came to me distressed and resentful, and I told her it was the consequence of what she had incessantly repeated. I had impressed upon her subconscious the idea that she didn't like being married, and that had been the result. "Now I understand," he said. "People get what they want and then feel very wronged." He soon became perfectly attuned to the situation and knew that they were both much happier apart. When a woman becomes indifferent or critical and ceases to be an inspiration to her husband, he misses the stimulation of his early relationship and becomes restless and unhappy. A man came to me dejected, miserable, and poor. His wife was interested in the science of numbers and had made him take a test. It seemed that the result had not been very favorable, for he told me that his wife was convinced he would never amount to anything being a number 2. I told him that, no matter what his number, he was a perfect idea in the divine mind, and that we would demand the success and prosperity already planned for him by that infinite intelligence. Within a few weeks, he had secured a very good position, and a year or two later, he achieved brilliant success as a writer. No man succeeds in business if he doesn't love his work. The picture the artist paints for love of his art is his finest work. You have to be consistent. No man can attract money if he despises it. Many people keep themselves poor by repeating that money means nothing to them and that they feel contempt for people who have it. This is why many artists are poor. Their contempt for money separates them from it. I remember hearing an artist criticize a colleague by saying that he didn't consider him to be any good because he had money saved in the bank. This mental attitude, of course, separates a person from his supply. One must be in harmony with something to attract it. Then I told her about a sisterhood in India that had replaced good morning with the phrase, "I salute the divinity within you." They saluted the divinity in every person and in the wild animals of the jungle, whom they never harmed because they saw only God in every living being. I asked her to salute the divinity in this man and repeat, "I see only your divine self. I see you as God sees you, perfect, made in his image and likeness." She noticed that she was becoming more balanced and slowly losing her resentment. He was a captain, and she nicknamed him Copy. One day, suddenly, and without much thought, she said, "May God bless the Copy, wherever he may be." I assured her that this was true love, and that when she had come full circle and was no longer bothered by this situation, she would have his love or attract an equivalent. At the time, I was moving and didn't have a phone, so I had no contact with her for a few weeks. Shortly after, I received a letter telling me they were married. I called her as soon as I could to hear what had happened, and she told me that one day she woke up without any pain, and that same night he had proposed to her. They were married a week later, and he seemed like the most devout man. There's an old saying that goes, "No man is your enemy. No man is your friend. All men are your teachers." One must become impersonal and learn what each person has to teach us, and soon we will learn their lessons and be free. The woman's lover was teaching her the selfless love that every man, sooner or later, must learn. Suffering is not necessary for human development. It is the result of violating spiritual law, but few people seem able to awaken from their soul sleep without it. Sometimes people who are happy become selfish, and this automatically activates the law of karma. Men often suffer losses because they don't appreciate what they have. I knew a woman who had a very nice husband. She kept saying that, even though they got along well, she wasn't interested in being married. She had other interests, barely remembered she had a husband, and only thought about him when she saw him. One day her husband told her he was in love with another woman and left her. She came to me distressed and resentful, and I told her it was the consequence of what she had incessantly repeated. I had impressed upon her subconscious the idea that she didn't like being married, and that had been the result. "Now I understand," he said. "People get what they want and then feel very wronged." He soon became perfectly attuned to the situation and knew that they were both much happier apart. When a woman becomes indifferent or critical and ceases to be an inspiration to her husband, he misses the stimulation of his early relationship and becomes restless and unhappy. A man came to me dejected, miserable, and poor. His wife was interested in the science of numbers and had made him take a test. It seemed that the result had not been very favorable, for he told me that his wife was convinced he would never amount to anything, being a number 2. I told him that, no matter what his number, he was a perfect idea in the divine mind, and that we would demand the success and prosperity already planned for him by that infinite intelligence. Within a few weeks, he had secured a very good position, and a year or two later, he achieved brilliant success as a writer. No man succeeds in business if he doesn't love his work. The picture the artist paints for love of his art is his finest work. You have to be consistent. No man can attract money if he despises it. Many people keep themselves poor by repeating that money means nothing to them and that they feel contempt for people who have it. This is why many artists are poor. Their contempt for money separates them from it. I remember hearing an artist criticize a colleague by saying that he didn't consider him to be any good because he had money saved in the bank. This mental attitude, of course, separates a person from his supply. One must be in harmony with something to attract it. Money is God in his manifestation, as freedom from want and limitation, but it must always be kept in circulation and put to right uses. Hoarding and thrift react with a grim vengeance. This does not mean that man should not have houses and lots, stocks and bonds, for the barns of the righteous shall be full. It does mean that, if an occasion arises when money is needed, man should not hoard even primary capital. By letting it flow fearlessly and joyfully, he opens the way for more to come in, for God is man's unfailing and inexhaustible supply. This is the spiritual attitude toward money, and the great bank of the universal never fails. We see an example of hoarding in the film Greed. The woman won $5,000 in the lottery, but refused to spend it. She hoarded and saved, letting her husband suffer and go hungry, while she worked cleaning floors. She loved money for its own sake, and placed it above all else, until one night she was murdered and the money was taken from her. This is a clear example that shows us that the love of money is the root of all evil. Money in itself is good and beneficial, but when used for destructive purposes, hoarded and stored, or considered more important than love, it brings illness, disaster, and the loss of money itself. Follow the path of love and all things add up, for God is love, and God is supply. Follow the path of selfishness and avarice, and supply disappears, or man is separated from it. For example, I knew the case of a very wealthy woman who hoarded her income and rarely gave anything away. She bought and bought and bought things for herself. She was very fond of necklaces, and a friend once asked her how many she owned. She replied that she had 67. She bought them and stored them away, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Had she worn the necklaces, her desire would have been quite legitimate. But she was violating the law of use. Her closets were filled with clothes she never wore and jewelry that never saw the light of day. The woman's arms became paralyzed from clutching things. Eventually, she was deemed incapable of managing her own affairs, and her wealth was turned over to others to manage. Thus, man, ignoring the law, brings about his own destruction. All sickness and all unhappiness stem from the violation of the law of love. Man's boomerangs of hatred, resentment, and criticism return laden with sickness and pain. Love seems almost a lost art, but man with the knowledge of spiritual law knows it must be recovered, for without it, it becomes dull bronze and clanging cymbals. For example, I had a student who came to me month after month to clear her conscience of resentment. After a while, she reached the point where she resented only one woman, but that one woman kept her busy. Gradually, she became balanced and harmonized, and one day, all resentment was erased. She came to visit me, looked radiant, and exclaimed that she felt fantastic. The woman had said something to her, but instead of becoming enraged, she responded lovingly and kindly, and her interlocutor apologized and was perfectly charming to her. He told me that no one could understand the wonderful lightness he felt inside. Love and goodwill are invaluable in business. A woman came to see me, complaining about her boss. She said she was cold and critical, and she knew I didn't want her in the position. "Well," I replied, Greet the divinity in the woman and send her love." "I can't," she replied. "She's a woman of marble." "Do you remember the story of the sculptor who asked for a certain piece of marble?" I asked. They questioned him about his choice, and he replied that inside that piece was a hidden angel that he would carve for everyone to admire. "Okay, I'll try," she said confidently. A week later, she confessed to me that she had done what I told her, that the boss was now very kind and drove her around in her vehicle whenever she needed it. Sometimes people are filled with remorse for having done wrong to someone, even wrongs they did many years ago. If the wrong cannot be corrected, its effect can be neutralized by being kind to someone in the present. This is what I do. Forget what lies behind and reach out toward what lies ahead. Sorrow, regret, and remorse tear at the cells of the body and poison the individual's atmosphere. A woman, very distressed, asked me to minister to her to be happy and joyful because her sorrow made her so irritable with her family members that she continued to create more karma. I was asked to treat a woman who was mourning her daughter. I denied all belief in loss and separation and affirmed that God was the woman's joy, love, and peace. The woman immediately regained her composure, but she sent word to me through her son that I should treat her no more because she was so happy that her attitude would not reflect well on society. The mortal mind loves to cling to its sorrows and regrets. I knew a woman who bragged about her problems, so she always had something to brag about. The old idea was that if a woman didn't care for her children, she wasn't a good mother. Now we know that maternal fear is responsible for many of the illnesses and accidents that befall children, because fear vividly imagines the illness or the feared situation, and these images, if not neutralized, materialize. Happy is the mother who can sincerely say that she places her child in God's hands and knows, therefore, that he or she is divinely protected. A certain woman woke up suddenly, sensing that her brother was in great danger. Instead of giving in to her fears, she began making declarations of truth, saying, "Man is a perfect idea in the divine mind and is always in his right place. Therefore, my brother is in his right place and is divinely protected." The next day, she discovered that her brother had been very close to a mine explosion, but had miraculously escaped. Man is his brother's keeper, in thought, and every man should know that what he loves dwells in the secret place of the Most High, under the shadow of the Almighty. No evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. He who fears is not perfected in love, and love is the fulfillment of the law. Intuition, or guidance. In all your ways, acknowledge him. He will direct your paths. There is nothing too great for the person who knows the power of his word and follows its intuitive promptings. Through his word, he sets invisible forces in motion and can rebuild his body or reshape his affairs. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to choose the right words, and the student carefully selects the affirmation he wishes to catapult into the invisible. He knows that God is his supply, that there is a supply for every demand, and that his spoken word releases this supply. Ask, and you shall receive. Man must take the first step. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. I have often been asked how to perform a materialization. I reply that they should speak the words, and then wait and do nothing until they have a definite clue. Demand the clue by saying, "Infinite Spirit, reveal the way to me. Let me know if there is anything I must do." The answer will come through intuition, or hunch, a casual remark from someone, or a passage from a book, etc. Sometimes the answers are surprisingly accurate. There was a woman who desired a large sum of money and spoke the words, "Infinite Spirit, open the way for my immediate supply. Make all that is mine by divine right come to me now in great avalanches of abundance. Give me a definite clue. Let me know if there is anything I must do." The thought came to her quickly, suggesting that she give a certain friend of hers, who had helped her spiritually, the sum of $100. She told this message to a friend, who suggested that she wait a little for another clue before giving it to her. She waited, and that same day she met a woman who told her that she had given $1 to someone, and that compared to her financial situation, it was as if she had given 100 to someone else. This was indeed a definite clue, so she knew she was right to give the $100. It was a gift that turned out to be a great investment, since shortly afterward, a large sum of money came to her in an extraordinary way. Giving opens the way for receiving. To create activity in finances, one must give. Tithing, or giving a tenth of one's income, is an ancient Jewish custom and is sure to bring increase. Many of the richest men in this country have been tithers, and I have never known it to fail as an investment. The tenth goes out and comes back blessed and multiplied, but the gift or tithe should be given with love and joy, for God loves a cheerful giver. Bills should be paid cheerfully. All money should be sent without fear and with a blessing. This mental attitude makes man the master of money. It is incumbent upon him to obey, and his word then opens vast stores of wealth. Man, by himself, limits his supply because of his limited vision. Sometimes the student has a great understanding of wealth, but is afraid to act. Vision and action must go hand in hand. As in the case of the man who bought the fur coat. A woman came to me asking me to preach to her about getting a certain job, so I asked, "Infinite Spirit, open the way for this woman's right position." One shouldn't simply ask for a position. One must specify the correct position, the place already planned in the divine mind, for that is the only one that will bring satisfaction. Then I gave thanks, because she had already received it, and because it would manifest quickly. Very soon, she was offered 3 positions, 2 in New York and 1 in Palm Beach, and she didn't know which one to choose, to which I suggested she ask for a definitive clue. The time required to decide had now arrived, and she still didn't know which one to choose, until one day, she called me to tell me that that very morning, upon getting up, she had smelled an aroma that she immediately associated with Palm Beach. She had been there before and knew its pleasant fragrance. I told her that if she could smell Palm Beach from that far away, it was certainly a clue. She accepted the position, and it proved to be a great success. Leadership often comes at an unexpected time. One day, I was walking down the street when I suddenly felt a strong impulse to go to a certain bakery a block or 2 away. The reasoning mind resisted, arguing that I really had nothing to go for. However, I had learned not to reason, so I went to the bakery, looked around, and certainly there was nothing there that I wanted. On my way out, I met a woman I had often thought about, and who was in great need of the help I could give her. Often, one goes for one thing and finds something else. Intuition is a spiritual faculty and does not explain. It merely points the way. It often happens that the person receives the message during his ministry, and the idea seems quite irrelevant, but some of God's clues are mysterious. During one of my classes, I tried to give each individual a definitive clue. At the end, one of my students told me she had felt the desire to move her furniture out of the storage room where it was kept and get an apartment. The woman had come to me for health reasons, and I told her that I knew that having a home of her own would improve her health. I also mentioned that I believed her problem, which was congestion, had developed. People do not perceive how their affairs act on the body. There is a mental correspondence for every disease. A person could receive instant healing through the realization that their body is a perfect idea in the divine mind, and therefore whole and perfect. But if they continue their destructive thinking, hoarding, hating, fearing, and condemning, the disease will return. Jesus Christ knew that all disease stemmed from sin, and he admonished the leper after the healing to go and sin no more, lest something worse come upon him. The human soul, or subconscious mind, must be washed whiter than snow to achieve permanent healing. And the metaphysician is always digging deep to provide the answer. Jesus Christ said, "Condemn not, lest ye also be condemned. Judge not, lest ye be judged." Many people have attracted sickness and unhappiness by condemning others, and what man condemns in others, he attracts to himself. A friend came to see me angry and distraught because her husband had left her for another woman. She condemned the other woman and kept repeating that she knew he was a married man and had no right to accept his attentions. I told her to stop condemning the woman, to bless her, and end the situation because, otherwise, she would be attracting the same thing to herself. She turned a deaf ear to my words, and a year or two later became deeply interested in a married man. A man holds an electric cable every time he criticizes or condemns, and sooner or later he will receive a shock. Indecision is an obstacle on many paths. To overcome it, repeat the following affirmation repeatedly. I am always under direct inspiration. I make correct decisions quickly. These words impress the subconscious, and soon one finds oneself awake and alert, making the right moves without hesitation. I have found it destructive to seek guidance on the psychic plane, as it is the plane of many minds, not the one mind. As man opens his mind to subjectivity, he becomes a target for destructive forces. The psychic plane is the result of man's mortal thought and is on the plane of opposites. It can receive good or bad messages. The science of numbers and the reading of horoscopes keep man on the mental or mortal plane, for they concern themselves only with the karmic path. I know a man who should have died years ago according to his horoscope, but he is alive and is the leader of one of the greatest movements for the elevation of human consciousness in this country. It takes a very strong mind to neutralize an evil prophecy. The student should declare, "Every false prophecy will come to nothing. Every plan that my Father in heaven has not planned will dissolve and dissipate. The divine idea is now being fulfilled." However, if a good message of coming happiness or wealth has ever been given, cherish it and expect it, for it will manifest itself sooner or later by the law of expectation. The will of man must serve to support the universal will. I want God's will to be done. God's will is to give each person all the righteous desires of their heart, and man's will must be used to sustain the perfect vision without wavering. The prodigal son said, "I will arise and go to my father." Indeed, it is often an effort of the will to leave behind the husks and debris of mortal thought. It is much easier for the average person to have fear than faith. Thus, faith is an effort of the will. As a person awakens spiritually, he recognizes that any external inharmony corresponds to a mental inharmony. If he stumbles or falls, he can recognize that he is stumbling or falling in his consciousness. One day, a student was walking down the street, condemning someone in her thoughts. She mentally repeated that a certain woman was the most unpleasant woman on earth, when suddenly 3 Boy Scouts rushed around the corner and almost knocked her down. She did not condemn the Boy Scouts, but immediately invoked the law of forgiveness and saluted the divinity of woman. The path of wisdom is a pleasant path, and all are filled with peace. One must be prepared for surprises when one has made one's demands on the universal. It may appear that everything is going wrong, when in reality, it is going well. For example, a woman was told that there were no losses in the divine mind. Therefore, she could not lose anything that belonged to her. Anything lost would be returned to her, or she would receive its equivalent. Several years earlier, she had lost $2,000. She had lent the money to a living relative, but the relative had died without leaving a record of it in his will. The woman was resentful and angry because she had no written statement of the transaction, so she never received the money. However, she decided to deny the loss and collect the $2,000 from the Universal Bank. He had to begin by forgiving the woman, since resentment and unforgiveness closed the doors of this wonderful bank. He declared that he denied the loss because there is no loss in the divine mind, and therefore he could not lose the $2,000 that belonged to him by divine right. When one door closes, another opens. He lived in an apartment house that was for sale, and in the lease, there was a clause stating that if the house was sold, the tenants must move out within 90 days. Within a few days, the landlord redid the lease and raised the rent. Once again, injustice crossed her path, but this time she remained undeterred. She blessed the landlord and declared that since the rent had gone up, it meant she would be much richer, for God was her provider. New leases were drawn up for the advanced rent, but through some divine error, the 90-day clause was forgotten. Shortly afterward, the landlord had the opportunity to sell the house, and because of the error in the new leases, the tenants could retain possession for another year. The agent offered each tenant $200 if they vacated, and several families moved out, but she and 2 other families stayed. A month or 2 passed, and the agent appeared again. He offered the woman that if she broke the rental agreement, he would give her $1,500, and she immediately thought this was her way of recouping the lost $2,000. She remembered telling her neighbors that they would all act on the same offer, so she went to consult with them. His neighbors said that if they had offered him $1,500, they would surely give him the $2,000. Indeed, he received a check for $2,000 to vacate the apartment. This is a formidable example of how the law works. The apparent injustice only paved the way for its demonstration. It showed that there is no loss, and that when man takes his spiritual position, he reaps all that is his from this great storehouse of good. I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. Locusts are the doubts, fears, resentments, and remorse of mortal thought. These adverse thoughts, by themselves, rob man. For no man gives to himself but to himself, and no man takes from himself but to himself. Man is here to test God and bear witness to the truth, and he can only test God by bringing abundance out of lack, and justice out of injustice. Test me in this, and see if I will not open the windows of heaven to pour down upon you a shower of blessings until you have enough. Perfect self-expression of divine design. No wind can divert my boat or change the tide of fate. There is, for every man, the perfect self-expression. There is a place he must fill that no one else can fill, something he must do that no one else can do. It is his destiny. This achievement is held as a perfect idea in the divine mind, awaiting man's recognition. Since the faculty of imagining is the creative faculty, it is necessary for man to see the idea before it can manifest. Thus, man's highest demand is the divine design for his life. He may not have the slightest idea what it is, for there may possibly be some marvelous talent hidden deep within him. His demand should be this: Infinite Spirit, open the way for the divine design of my life to manifest. Let the genius within me be released now. Let me clearly see the perfect plan. The perfect plan includes health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression. This is the framework of life that brings perfect happiness. When one has made this demand, one will be able to see great changes in one's life, for almost all men have fallen away from the divine design. I know that, in the case of a certain woman, it was as if a cyclone had struck her life. But the readjustments came quickly, and new and wonderful conditions took the place of the old. Perfect self-expression will never be a job, but will have such absorbing interest that it will seem almost like play. The student knows, furthermore, that when man comes into the world financed by God, the necessary supply for his perfect self-expression will be at hand. Many geniuses have struggled for years with the problem of supply, when their word and faith would have quickly released the necessary funds. For example, one day after my class, One of my students came up and gave me a penny. I only have 7 cents in the world, and I'm going to give you one because I have faith in the power of your spoken word. I want you to prophesy perfect self-expression and prosperity for me. I prophesied, and I didn't see him again until a year later. He returned one day, successful and happy, with a roll of bills in his pocket. Immediately after you prophesied, I was offered a position in a distant city, and now I am full of health, happiness, and supplies. A woman's perfect self-expression may lie in becoming a perfect wife, a perfect mother, a perfect homemaker, and not necessarily in having a public career. Demand clear paths, and the path will become easy and successful. One must not visualize or force a mental image. When you demand that the divine design enter your conscious mind, you will receive flashes of inspiration, and you will begin to see yourself accomplishing some great feat. This is the image or idea you must hold unwaveringly. What the man was seeking seeks him. The telephone was seeking Bell. Parents should never force careers and professions on their children. With a knowledge of spiritual truth, one could speak of the divine plan from infancy, or even prenatally. A prenatal decree should be, may the God in that soon-to-be-born child have perfect expression. May the divine design for his mind, body, and affairs be manifested throughout his life and throughout eternity. God's will, not man's, be done. God's pattern, not man's, is the command we find throughout the scriptures, and the Bible is a book dealing with the science of the mind. It is a book that tells man how to free his soul, or subconscious mind, from slavery. The battles described are pictures of man waging war against mortal thoughts. Man's enemies will be those of his own house. Every man is Jehoshaphat, and every man is David, who slays Goliath, mortal thought, with the white stone, faith. So man must be careful not to be the wicked and lazy servant who buried his talent, for there is a terrible punishment for not utilizing one's ability. Often, fear stands between man and his perfect expression. Stage fright has hampered many geniuses, but this can be overcome by the spoken word, or prophesying. The individual then loses all self-awareness and feels simply that he is a channel for infinite intelligence to express itself through him. He is under direct inspiration, fearless and confident, because he feels it is the Father within who is doing the work. There was a young man who came to my class with his mother to ask me to minister to him in preparation for his upcoming examinations at school. I told him to declare himself one with infinite intelligence, and to repeat that he knew all he needed to know on this subject. He had an excellent knowledge of history, but he was unsure of his arithmetic. I saw him afterward, and he told me that he had prophesied for his arithmetic examinations and passed with the highest honors, but he had stuck to his history examinations, thinking he could depend on himself, and he got a very bad grade. A man usually receives a setback when he is too self-confident, meaning he relies on his own personality and not on the Father within. Another of my students gave me an example of this. One summer, she took a long trip abroad, visiting many countries and not knowing the language. She asked for guidance and protection every minute, and her affairs ran smoothly and miraculously. Her luggage was never delayed or lost. Her accommodations were always ready, and she was wonderfully looked after wherever she went. She returned to New York, and, knowing the language, felt God was no longer necessary, so she went about her business in the ordinary way. That's when everything started to go wrong. His luggage was delayed, and he arrived amidst disharmony and confusion. The student must develop the habit of practicing God's presence every minute. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. Nothing is too small or too big. Sometimes an insignificant incident can be the turning point in a man's life. Robert Fulton developed a steamboat by observing some boiling water in a kettle. I often see my students stop their materializations through resistance or by pointing the way. They fix their faith in a single channel and dictate just the way they wish the manifestation to come, which causes things to grind to a halt. My way, not yours, is the command of infinite intelligence. All power, whether steam or electricity, must have a non-resistant engine or instrument to work it, and man is that engine or instrument. Again and again, the man is told to be still. O Judah, fear not, but tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you. You will not need to fight this battle. Stand, be still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you. We see this in the incidents of the $2,000 that came to the woman through the landlord when she stopped resisting and appeared unperturbed, and the woman who won the man's love after all the suffering she had endured. The student's goal is poise. Poise is power, because it gives God's power the opportunity to penetrate man so that he desires and does his good will. He who has poise thinks clearly and makes correct decisions quickly, not missing a trick. Anger clouds the vision, poisons the blood, is the root of many illnesses, and provokes wrong decisions that lead to failure. It has been called one of the worst sins, as its reaction is so damaging. The student learns that, in metaphysics, sin has a much broader meaning than in the ancient teaching. Whatever is not of faith is sin. He discovers that fear and worry are mortal sins. They are inverted faith that, through distorted mental images, cause what he fears to happen. His job is to expel these enemies from the subconscious mind. When man is without fear, he is finished. Man is God-fearing, says Maeterlinck. So, as we have read in previous chapters, man can only overcome fear by drawing near to what he fears. When Jehoshaphat and his army prepared to engage the enemy, singing, "Praise the Lord, for his loving kindness endures forever," they found that their enemies had destroyed each other, and there was nothing left to fight. A woman asked a friend to deliver a message to another friend. The woman was afraid to deliver the message, as the reasoning mind told her not to meddle in other people's affairs. She felt uncomfortable because she had given her promise, so she finally decided to face the discomfort and invoke the law of divine protection. She met the friend to whom she was to deliver the message and opened her mouth to share it. But before she could say a word, this friend told her that a certain friend they knew had left the city. This made it unnecessary to deliver the message, as the situation depended on this same friend being in the city. Since she was willing to do so, she was not obligated. And since she was not afraid, the situation faded away. The student often delays his demonstration because he believes it is incomplete. He should affirm that in the divine mind there is only completion. Therefore, his own demonstration is complete. His work is perfect. His home is perfect. His health is perfect. All he demands are perfect ideas recorded in the divine mind, and they must manifest under grace and in a perfect manner. Be grateful for having received in the invisible and actively prepare to receive in the visible. One of my students needed a financial materialization. She came to see me and asked why it wasn't finished, to which I replied that perhaps it was because she had the habit of leaving things unfinished, and her subconscious had gotten used to not completing. As the exterior, so the interior. She told me I was right, that she often started things and never finished them. She told me very resolutely that she would go home and finish something she had started several weeks ago, and that this would be a symbol of its materialization. She hurried and finished the article, and soon afterward, the money arrived in the most curious way. Her husband collected his salary twice that month, and when he reported his mistake to the accounting department, they told him to keep it. When a man asks, believing he must receive, for God creates his own channels. I am sometimes asked how to choose among various talents, to which I reply that they should demand to be clearly shown. Ask the Infinite Spirit to give you a definite clue, to reveal its perfect expression, and to show you which talent you should utilize. I have known people who suddenly enter a new line of work and are fully prepared without even having received any training. Therefore, affirm that you are fully equipped for God's plan for your lives, and don't be afraid to take advantage of opportunities. Some people are cheerful givers but poor receivers. They reject gifts out of pride or for some negative reason, thus blocking their channels, and invariably end up with little or nothing. For example, a woman who had given away a lot of money was offered a gift of several $1,000s. However, she refused to accept it, saying she didn't need it. And soon afterward, her finances became tight, and she ran up a debt for that same amount. Man must graciously receive the bread returned to him on still water. Freely you have given, freely you shall receive. There is always a perfect balance between giving and receiving. And although man must give without thought of returns, he violates the law if he does not accept those that come to him. For all gifts are from God, man being merely the channel. A thought of lack should never be entertained about the giver. For example, when the man gave me a penny, I didn't feel sorry for him, nor did I think he was poor and couldn't give me more. I imagined him prosperous and with abundant supplies, and it was this thought that attracted him. If one has been a bad receiver, one must become a good one, accept what is given to oneself, and open one's channels to receive. The Lord loves a cheerful receiver as well as a cheerful giver. I have often been asked why one person is born rich and healthy, while another is born poor and sick. Where there is an effect, there is always a cause. There is no such thing as chance. This question is answered by the law of reincarnation. People go through many births and deaths until they discover the truth that sets them free. They are drawn back to the earthly plane by unfulfilled desire, to pay their karmic debts or to fulfill their destiny. The person born rich and healthy has had images in their subconscious mind, in their past life, of health and wealth, and the poor and sick person of sickness and poverty. Man manifests on every plane the sum total of his subconscious beliefs. However, birth and death are laws created by man. For the wages of sin is death, the Adamic fall in consciousness through belief in two powers. The real man, the spiritual man, has no birth or death. He has never been born and has never died. As he was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. It is through truth that man is freed from the law of karma, sin, and death, and manifests the man made in his image and likeness. Man's freedom comes through the fulfillment of his destiny, bringing into manifestation the divine design for his life. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Negations and affirmations. You shall also decree a thing, and it shall be established for you. All the good that is to be manifested in human life is already an accomplished fact in the divine mind, and is released through human recognition or the spoken word. Therefore, one must be careful to decree that only the divine idea be manifested, for it often decrees failure or misfortune through its idle words. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance to word one's demands correctly, as stated in a previous chapter. If one desires a home, a friend, a position, or any other good thing, the demand must be made by divine selection. Say, for example, Infinite Spirit, open the way for my right home, my right friend, my right position. I give thanks that it is now manifested under grace, in a perfect way. The last part of the statement is the most important. I knew a woman who demanded $1,000. Shortly afterward, her daughter was injured, and they received a $1,000 settlement because it had not manifested itself perfectly. The demand should have been worded like this: Infinite Spirit, I give thanks that the $1,000 which is mine by divine right, is now released and comes to me under grace and in a perfect way. As one grows in financial awareness, one must demand that the enormous sums of money, which are theirs by divine right, come to them under grace in a perfect manner. It is impossible for man to release more than he thinks is possible, because one is bound by the limited expectations of the subconscious. He must expand his expectations in order to receive more fully. Man often limits himself in his demands. For example, a student demanded $600 by a certain date and received it. However, shortly afterward, he heard that he had come very close to receiving $1,000, but had only received $600 as a result of his word. They limited the Holy One of Israel. Wealth is a matter of conscience. The French have a legend that exemplifies this. A poor man was walking along a road when he met a traveler, who stopped him and said, "My good friend, I see you are poor. Take this gold nugget, sell it, and you will be rich all your days." The man was overjoyed at his good fortune and took the nugget home. He soon found work and became so prosperous that he didn't need to sell it. Years passed, and he became a very rich man. One day, he met a poor man on the road, stopped him, and said, "My good friend, I will give you this gold nugget, which, if you sell it, will make you rich for life." The beggar took the nugget, had it valued, and discovered that it was a simple piece of brass-painted gold. As we can see, the first man became rich because he felt rich, thanks to the simple thought that the nugget was gold. Every person has a nugget of gold within them. It is their awareness of gold, of opulence, that brings richness into their life. People must begin at the end of their journey by making their demands. That is, declaring that they have already received. Before you call, I will answer you. Continual affirmation establishes belief in the subconscious, and it wouldn't be necessary to repeat an affirmation more than once if one had perfect faith. One should not beg or plead, but rather give thanks repeatedly that one has already received. The desert will rejoice and blossom like the rose. This rejoicing, which is still present in the desert state of consciousness, opens the way to liberation. The Lord's Prayer takes the form of a command and a demand. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and ends in praise. For yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. As for the works of my hands, command me. So prayer is both command and demand, praise and thanksgiving. The student's work is to believe that, with God, all things are possible. This is fairly easy to state in the abstract, but quite difficult when we're facing a problem. For example, a woman needed to manifest a large sum of money within a certain time frame. She knew she had to do something to achieve fulfillment, because fulfillment is manifestation, and she demanded a clue. She was strolling through a department store when she saw a beautiful pink enamel paper knife and felt drawn to it. He thought he did not have a paper cutter good enough to open letters containing large and important checks. So he bought the paper knife that the reasoning mind would have called an extravagance. When she held it in her hand, she found herself opening an envelope containing a check for a very large sum, and within a few weeks, she received the money. The pink paper knife was her source of active faith. Many stories are told about the power of the subconscious when directed with faith, and here is a good example. A man was spending the night in a farmhouse whose windows were nailed shut with wood. In the middle of the night, he felt suffocated and went to one of them, but couldn't open it. In desperation, he broke the glass with his fist, gulped in breaths of fresh air, and spent a wonderful night. The next morning, he discovered he had broken the glass of a large bookcase, and that the window had remained closed all night. He had supplied himself with oxygen simply by thinking he had breathed oxygen. When a student begins to materialize, he must never back down. Let not the man who wavers think that he will receive anything from the Lord. A student once made the wonderful statement that, when he asked the Father for something, he would put his foot down and say, "Father, I will take nothing less than what I have asked for, but more." Man must never compromise. Having done everything, we must stand firm. This is sometimes the most difficult moment of materialization. The temptation comes to give up, to back down, to compromise. He who just stands and waits also serves. Demonstrations usually come at the last minute, because that is when the man gets carried away. That is, stops reasoning, and infinite intelligence has a chance to work. The man's gloomy wishes are glumly answered, and his impatient desires are long delayed or violently fulfilled. A woman asked me why she was constantly losing or breaking her glasses, and we discovered that she often said to herself and others that she wished she could get rid of them. Before long, her impatient wish was violently satisfied. What she should have demanded was perfect eyesight, but what registered in the subconscious was simply the desire to be rid of her glasses, so they were continually broken or lost. There are two mental attitudes that bring about loss: depreciation, as in the case of the woman who didn't appreciate her husband, or fear of loss, which creates an image of loss in the subconscious. When a student is able to let go of their problem, delegate their burden, they will have an instant manifestation. There was a woman under a very violent storm, whose umbrella was completely broken by the force of the wind. She was about to pay a visit to some people she didn't know, and didn't want to make her first appearance with a damaged umbrella. But she couldn't throw it away, as it didn't belong to her. In desperation, she asked God for help, telling him to take care of the umbrella because she didn't know what to do with it. A moment later, she heard a voice behind her, asking if she wanted her umbrella repaired. Right there, behind her, an umbrella repairer had appeared. Of course, she answered yes, and the man fixed the umbrella while she went into the house to make a phone call. When she returned, the umbrella had been repaired. There's always a repairer in a person's path when one places one's umbrella, or the situation, in God's hands. One must always follow a negation with an affirmation. One night, I received a telephone call to see a man I had never seen before. He was apparently very ill, so I made the affirmation denying this apparent illness. It is unreal, therefore. It cannot register in one's consciousness. This man is a perfect idea in the divine mind. He is pure substance expressing perfection. In the divine mind, there is no time or space. Therefore, the word reaches its destination instantly and does not return empty. I have treated patients in Europe and found the result to be instantaneous. I am often asked the difference between visualizing and visioning. Visualizing is a mental process governed by reasoning or the conscious mind. Visioning is a spiritual process governed by intuition or the superconscious mind. The student must train their mind to receive these flashes of inspiration and elaborate divine images through defined clues. When a man can say, "I desire only what God desires for me," his false desires fade from consciousness, and the master architect, the God within, gives him a new set of plans. God's plan for each man transcends the limitation of the reasoning mind and is always the framework of life that contains health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression. Many men are building a bungalow in their imagination when they should be building a palace. If a student tries to force a demonstration through the reasoning mind, he brings it to a standstill. "I will speed it up," says the Lord. He must act only through intuition or definitive clues. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently. Trust in Him, too, and He will do it. I have seen the law act in the most surprising ways. For example, I had a student declare that it was necessary for her to have $100 by the next day. This was a vitally important debt that needed to be satisfied, so I prophesied, declaring that the Spirit was never too late and that the supply was ready. She called me that same night to tell me about the miracle. She said she happened to go to her safe deposit box at the bank to examine some papers, and when she moved them, she saw a crisp, new $100 bill at the bottom of the box. She was amazed and said she was sure she hadn't put it there because she had checked the papers so many times. It may have been a materialization, like Jesus Christ materialized the loaves and fishes. Man will reach the stage where his word materializes instantly. The fields, ripe with the harvest, will manifest immediately, as in all the miracles of Jesus Christ. There is tremendous power in the name of Jesus Christ. It is the manifested truth. Whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give it you. The power of this name lifts the student to the fourth dimension, where he is freed from all astral and psychic influences and becomes unconditional and absolute, as God himself is unconditional and absolute. I have seen many healings performed using the words, "In the name of Jesus Christ." Christ was both person and principle, and the Christ within each man is his Redeemer and salvation. The Christ within is one's own fourth-dimensional self, man made in the image and likeness of God. This is the self that has never failed, never known sickness or pain, never been born and never died. It is the resurrection and the life of each man. No one comes to the Father except through the Son, means that God, the universal, working in the place of the particular, becomes the Christ in man, and the Holy Spirit signifies God action. Thus, daily, man is manifesting the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Man must turn thought into an art. The master thinker is an artist and is careful to paint only divine designs upon the canvas of his mind. He paints these pictures with masterful strokes of power and determination, having absolute faith that no power can mar their perfection, and that they will manifest the ideal in his life. All power is given to man through right thinking, so that he may bring his heaven to earth. This is the goal of the game of life. The simple rules are fearless faith, non-resistance, and love. May each reader now free themselves from that which has held them in bondage through the ages, standing between them and what is theirs, and know the truth that sets them free. Free to fulfill their destiny, to bring into manifestation the divine design for their life, health, wealth, love, and perfect self-expression. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind.